It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast as we cover the very latest in property news every morning on iHeartRadio, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. This morning it is a Monday, January the 22nd, and another fresh week ahead of us. If it's property, we're probably talking about it in 2024. And if there is a question about the real estate property market that you would like us to cover, then you can email us to this email address, myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. We love getting your emails. Well, land tax obligations in Queensland surged over 10% in the past year, reflecting escalating land values, with the $600,000 threshold stagnant and unchanged since 2007. The Real Estate Institute of Queensland urged an adjustment for inflation. However, the state government contests, citing a potential annual revenue loss of $200 million. Now, there are two things clearly at play, and they're different things: loss of revenue and an adjustment of inflation. And many commentators are saying loss of revenue should not be the sole argument for not adjusting the inflationary rate. But as we know, local state coffers and revenue is always going to be a hot political debating topic. And we will wait and see whether later in 2024, if there is any adjustment for the inflation rate that the Real Estate Institute of Queensland is asking for. Well, we're back to the time tunnel this morning with our summer series of real estate interviews with the real estate industry's leading commentators. And coming up this morning, we go back to September of last year when we caught up with Angus Moore to talk about the Proptrak numbers around first home buyers and the state of the current property market in September. Also, Christopher Ladley is here talking about being prepared to buy before the end of the year. This is 2023, and why he isn't seeing much distressed properties in his local area. And we also catch up with Arjun Paliwal from InvestorKit Buyers Agency about Sydney's auction space. Why is it crucial to comprehend what is going on in the auction Sydney market? So all of that is coming up on your Real Estate Back to Work Monday.
Remember to follow us on any of the podcast platforms so you never miss a real estate podcast. You can follow us on Apple, Spotify and Amazon. Know your property with us. You're listening to the summer series on the Real Estate Podcast.
The story that you might tell here is people who have seen their prices growing faster than they maybe expected. They're now sitting on quite a big chunk of equity in their home. It's important to remember some of these places, particularly places like regional Queensland and Brisbane, have seen prices grow by more than 50% across the pandemic, which represents an enormous increase in equity and in wealth. And so they're using that to upgrade sooner than they might have otherwise planned to.
And saving for a deposit for first home buyers at the moment is brutal in this current climate. And calculating the time needed to save for a deposit involves determining, of course, the number of years a household earning the average income would require to save 20% of their gross household income for a 20% deposit on a median-priced home. So, Angus, people really are looking at a number of years just to save for their deposit.
Yeah, the 20% deposit is a very substantial burden for first-time buyers, and we've only seen that increase over recent decades. We talked a bit about how affordability is as bad as we've seen in 3 decades, and basically as bad as it was when interest rates were north of 15%. What is much worse today is what we call housing accessibility, or the difficulty of saving a deposit. To put some numbers around that, obviously a deposit's about wealth. So it is a kind of number of dollars that you need to be able to get a mortgage. But one way you can think about it is how long it would take you to save that wealth. Today, across Australia, if you were an average household, it would take you about 5.5 years if you were saving 20% of your income, which is no mean feat. 20% is a fair chunk. By comparison, in 1990, it was less than 3 years. So it's basically twice as long today as it used to be, just a much bigger burden.
And it was interesting to note that, of course, first home buyers experienced very favourable conditions, we could put it like that, in 2020 and 2021, thanks to these record low interest rates and the government incentives resulting, and I was surprised to see this, resulting in more than 160,000 first home buyers taking out new mortgages during 2021. That's the highest annual number in over a decade. But then, obviously, things became a little bit more difficult for the first home buyer.
Exactly right. It's maybe hard to remember now given how quickly interest rates have risen, but during the pandemic, affordability was actually fairly good because interest rates were sitting at record lows, and that meant a lot of homes were actually affordable for people, and we saw first home buyers respond. 2021 was a really busy, active year for first home buyers, the busiest that we've seen since 2009, which again was when interest rates fell, and that helped encourage a lot of first home buyers into the market. We're obviously not seeing anything like that at the moment. The number of first home buyers has really pulled back as interest rates have risen, and affordability has kind of gone from pretty good in 2020 and 2021 to worst on record in 2023.
From investment strategies to market analysis, know your property with us on the Real Estate Podcast.
Distressed property listings, we mentioned, vary from state to state. I want to ask you, Christopher, how much help has actually come from banks that you are seeing?
Yeah, look, really good question, Craig, and it varies a lot from bank to bank. Some banks have been really helpful throughout the process and are offering our clients, much lower revert rate. So the revert rate is, you're falling off that fixed rate loan. Some banks are really competitive and really trying to help those clients. Some banks probably not as much so. So it's really important to, really have a good look at the total market.
Yeah, and I've talked to many mortgage brokers. One of the artful things, if I can put it like that, is the ability to listen and to listen correctly to the client, because sometimes the client is talking and not always does the person sort of pick up on cues. So that's really important, isn't it? Listening to the client, and then as a result of that whole listening, getting that structure right, or in this case, particularly in the times that we live, restructuring.
Absolutely spot on. Listening is, I know this sounds obvious, but it's such an important skill, because by listening to our clients, sometimes we're just having long chats with our clients and, asking the questions like, are you okay? It's not just, hey, how's your home loan going? But are you okay? What's going on? And through listening, some people are annoyed that their interest rate went up, so we find them a better deal, but some people might genuinely be feeling, a bit of pain or a bit of discomfort. So we can talk a bit further about that and what that means, because everybody's got lots of different options. So, sometimes we might need to restructure a loan. So maybe change the loan term, or obviously finding a lower interest rate is always a great goal. But simple things like changing the structure of the loan or that term, it can mean the difference between a home loan repayment that is affordable. And of course, extending a loan term is never ideal. Taking a 25-year loan term, rolling it back out to 30 years, that's not ideal in anybody's language. But if you ask the client, well, would you consider changing that loan term, or do you want to be in a position where you can't afford the monthly repayment? And once you start having those conversations with somebody, the answer becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly.
Don't let dinner prep time go to waste. Plug in your earbuds to listen to a world of powerful real estate news and information. You're listening to the Summer Series on the Real Estate Podcast.
Well, the first thing is, when you're looking at data of any market, an example here, Sydney, it's critical to make sure you understand the transactions that are taking place. And auctions, as a result, in Sydney make up such a large percentage of sales. Just to give you some statistics, in Adelaide over the last couple of weeks, so if we looked at that mid-September data, Adelaide here had 86 auctions occur in a particular week. And then Brisbane had about 88. Now, if we take Brisbane's 88 and you compare it against Sydney's 811, that's almost 10% of Sydney, but Brisbane has half the population of Sydney. So you can see that it's not as much of a makeup in Brisbane as it is in comparison in Sydney. And Melbourne follows much the same as Sydney, where they have similar auction rates in terms of volumes. And this just shows how important it is as a percentage of sale. And especially now with springtime, things get busy.
Yeah, so in your experience analysing auction data, what are the critical percentage metrics that distinguish, let's say, excellence next to average and then below average auction activity?
This is a good question, because now that we know it makes up such an important portion of sales, obviously it's data that you should start tracking. And when you're starting to look at these data points, we found that when auctions get sort of in that low to mid 60s, 62 to 65%, we see either a very start of the phase of softening markets, or in some cases, balanced markets. This is where you're just not getting an amazing result all the time, you're not getting a horrible result all the time, and this is that point in which people say, oh, markets may start declining here. Now, naturally, if you're below that or hovering at that for too long, prices tend to come down a little bit, as they have in history when looking at Sydney. However, when things start to ramp up above that, it's usually a sign of price growth, and that price growth being quite important to Sydney's market when you combine auction data. This is because it makes up such a large volume of activity. In recent weekends, we've seen rates of 70% plus, 72% in that mid-September weekend. Whilst it's similar to the weekend prior, it's better than the weekend this time last year, which was at 65%. And this time last year, we were in the swings of the declines of Sydney market too. So it just shows you that the low 60s, the mid 60s, that can be where the declines happen. And when you're in the 70s, it's definitely price rising time.
Yeah, and it is, as you say, it is on the way up. And given that campaigns may be time-consuming, along with data lags and buyer impatience is also a bit of a factor, how can prospective buyers, particularly in Sydney, prevent consistently overpaying or frequently missing out at auctions?
Yeah, so when you're looking at overpaying, comparable analysis is a key part of that. And with comparable analysis, we tend to follow a framework of internal, external, land size, recency of sale, the neighborhood it's in, and the market heat occurring. And now when you transition that market heat point, this is where getting on the ground is more important in markets like Sydney, in markets like Melbourne, due to the auction portions of sale. And getting on the ground is when you start to see the truth. How much activity is there? How much movement is there from your comparables versus actual sales? What level of bidding activity is there, not just the price activity, but the actual bidding and people at the open homes, the inspections at the auctions. All of this data helps because you see a disconnect in the data, considering when a property first goes to market, that might be the point in which the interest is the highest. And if that's the point and auctions are carrying themselves 4, sometimes 6 weeks or 3 weeks down the track, you're constantly in this lag mode when a market's having a good run, especially like clearance rates today in the 70s.
Don't navigate the real estate market alone. Let us help guide you in the world of real estate every day. Make better informed decisions with the latest news and insights.
So Bar Point specifically 1.2 million, but in the same suburb, 2083, up to 5.2 million, so a really big range.
So $60,000, what is that buying you?
Vacant land, usually on the back row without a jetty spot.
Just expand on that. So how big is the site, etc.?
The site would be between 500 to 700 square metres, probably about 200 metres walk from the foreshore, but those particular ones wouldn't have any designated spot to park your boat, which can make your access a little bit tricky.
We see a lot of mums and dads coming through properties that are now either buying an investment to future-proof their children's ability to step into the property market, or even mum and dad kicking in for a deposit that enables the first home buyers to get into the marketplace here in Jungarland.
I have never seen a city grow as fast as Dubai. The market was on fire in 2012, and then it really stagnated around 2015 when, we had announced we had won the expo and sellers were getting really excited, putting up their their prices, crazy prices, by 30%. And then, from 2020, from obviously we know the pandemic, and this has been an extraordinary growth in the last 3 years.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.